This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hey, I've got a quick announcement for you before we get to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Coming very soon in December, I will be launching the Storyworks Fiction online school. So I'll be bringing courses to you based on my years of teaching and coaching and developmental editing with hundreds of writers. The first class I'm offering is called Scary Monsters and Super Creeps. So you can come channel your inner monster and have a lot of fun exploring scary and creepy characters. We will get you writing across all genres, whether hero or villain, exploring lots of types and tropes. And this course contains lectures, examples, and generative free writing, so you're going to get that monster out of your head and onto the page. Now, the other course that I will be launching right away in December is the structure of story. I have seen time and again in my work with writers that certain fundamentals just aren't common knowledge. They're the sort of things many teachers take for granted, assuming everyone in class knows them. They're critical to shaping a narrative, but they aren't necessarily simple to grasp. If you want to be kept up to date on the breaking news, head over to storyworkspodcast.com. Join my email list, and you will be the first to know when these courses launch. Now, enjoy this week's episode. It's the second episode with Becca Puglisi of the Emotional Wound Thesaurus. Hello, and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. We are back with international speaker, writing coach, and best-selling author Becca Puglisi. She and Angela Ackerman have written the Emotion Thesaurus and its sequels, including the Emotional Wound Thesaurus. If you haven't already heard it, go back and listen to the companion episode. We talk all about emotional wounds and the thesauri. It's really a great one. We could have kept going, but but we didn't. We're doing this instead, character arcs. So welcome back, Becca. We are so happy to see you again.
Thank you. This is super fun. I try to talk to my husband about, writing stuff, and he's very, very patient, but I always can tell that moment when he's like just being polite now and I need to stop talking.
Yeah, so the eyes glaze over. Yeah. Well, anytime you want to geek out about storycraft, just send us a note. We'll have you back on the show. All right. So character arcs factored into your Emotional Wound Thesaurus fairly heavily. It was really great to see that, and I loved how you handled the arc in the essays. You talk about the characters need to change, how wounds factor into that, but let's first just kind of define the character arc. And you had 4 arcs, change, static, or 3 arcs, and then 4 components, but the change arc, the static arc, and the failed arc. Do you want to kind of give us your working definition of the character arc? And
Sure.
Okay,
the character arc is basically the way that we have defined it, that the change that the character experiences over the course of a novel. The character, Michael Haig puts it, it's a story about A who wants B. It's a character who wants a certain story goal, a certain outer motivation that they're trying to achieve. But he then goes on and adds the why component. It's a story about A who wants B because why? Why does the character want to get the girl or win the contest or, connect with their estranged brother, whatever it is. And that why is usually what is driving them, and it's something that's usually missing, like a basic human need that's missing. And they're pursuing this goal so that they can fill that need. And in doing that, they become fulfilled. They become more whole, more complete. So that is really the character arc, this journey of them starting out, something is not right. They're pursuing a goal in order to fill that need. And over the course of the story, they learn very often something about themselves. They recognize something that happened to them in the past that they have not dealt with, that has been crippling them along the way. And they face whatever it is that has been keeping them from being able to achieve this missing need that's been lacking. So that's really the character arc, and there's different kinds of arcs during a story. That's the change arc, because the character is changing over the course of the story. The failed arc is the one where the character is trying to do this. This is their goal, but they fail. It really basically is the tragedy story, where they're unable to totally come to grips with what happened to them, or they're unable to change enough to get whatever it is that they wanted to meet that need that was missing. And then the static arc is the one that is where the character arc is flat. It's James Bond, it's Indiana Jones.
Right.
Those kind of characters who go the course of the story, it's really more about the story goal than it is about the character. And you see these characters, especially going from, ones in a series, where they don't really change. They're the same throughout. That has a different, obviously, kind of setup and a different structure for the character. So those are really the three kinds that we focused on.
Right. Yeah. The static arc would be the arcless protagonist. I think we have an episode on that. And then the change arc is the one we're most familiar with, the one we really think about when we think what is a character arc. And you define it as the internal evolution leading to the goal achievement. So I like how you put that, who the character, what the plot, why the motivation, and then at the end of that arc is the evolution once that goal is attained, or possibly not attained, but your character could still have a successful arc if failure of reaching the goal leads to growth as opposed to tragedy, and stagnation. Yeah. And those 4 key components you describe, inner motivation, outer conflict, and inner conflict. Can we talk about those a bit?
Sure. The outer motivation, as we said, is the story goal. This is the obvious thing they're trying to accomplish, that if they don't, the stakes are big. If they are unable to get this thing that they're really after, they are not going to be fulfilled. They're going to continue in the kind of half-life that they've been living, not being true to themselves, or they're going to end up in a worse situation. So that's the outer motivation, is the story goal. And then you have the outer conflict, which is all of the forces or the oppositions that are kind of blocking them. It could be other people, it could be physical, like the weather, the landscape. It's all, organizations, ideology, all the things that are going to kind of make it difficult for them to get what they want. The inner motivation is I believe that it's almost always a human need that if we go back to Maslow's hierarchy from Psychology 101, like way in the past, he talks about these 5 basic human needs that everybody has. And if you are missing one of them, it becomes a driving force for you to regain it. If security is missing, or if love is missing, we're going to alter our behaviors, our decisions, our ideas, our beliefs are going to kind of shift in order to allow us to pursue that thing that we're missing so that we can get it back. That's the inner motivation. That's why the character is trying to get the girl, or why the character is trying to win the contest. Whatever the story goal is, there's a need that's missing, and that is why they're trying to do it. And then the inner conflict is the internal blocks, the internal things that are making it really hard for the character to succeed. This is like insecurities that they have, flaws that they, have always had, that are just kind of part of who they are, and they may not even recognize them as being negative, but they're there and they're blocking them from achievement. Self-doubt, biases and misbeliefs, just things that are internally keeping them from getting what they want. Those are the 4 pieces.
Yeah. Now, how can a writer use Maslow's hierarchy in this process of pre-writing and character development and kind of shaping an arc?
It kind of depends on where you start, I think, because some people, they start with an idea, an idea for a story, and the character is completely unknown. And then there are other people who, I wish I was one of these people, who the character comes to them, and they're fully formed and they're talking to them, and the writer knows the character, and it's like, that would be awesome. But it really depends on where you're starting from. I think that if you've got a character already and you see that character and you know kind of who they are and what they're like and what they want, then you can work backwards from that point to fill in the blanks along the way. If you know that their story goal is to win a court case, they're a lawyer and they want to win a court case, and it's, really, really, really important that they do this. Well, why is it so important that this person win this court case? What is driving them? And if you can look at the human needs, you can very often see, are they doing it because of an esteem problem, because they lack the esteem in themselves, or they lack other people's recognition for what they can do and what they're capable of? Is it a self-actualization thing, because they are doing this job because it's what their parents wanted them to do, and they've never ever really been felt any sense of worth or value in it, but now because of this particular case, it's going to bring them a sense of fulfillment. Like, what is the need that is driving it? And when you can find the need, then you can move back from there to find the wounding event. Why don't they have the esteem? Why don't they feel that they're worthy of this case, or that they're able to, to succeed in this area? What might have happened to them in the past that would contribute to that being the case for them, and then feeling this sense of this lack of self-worth? So you can, it's awesome because you can kind of go either direction. Right. If you are starting from a point where you know nothing about the character, you can start, in the very back. You can say, well, okay, I think that this makes sense for my story, that this thing happened to the character. So what character traits are going to come out? What is this person going to be like? What's going to be important to them? What need is going to be missing because of that wounding event? So you can really go whichever direction you need to go. And the needs, that pyramid that most of us have seen, is really a great resource for helping us figure out what's driving the character, which one of those needs is missing. It's going to be what's driving them. Yeah, that is a really great resource. And I love how you could sort of tip it on its head and use it, from the base up or from the tip down, as you were saying, starting with the wound or starting with the event, whatever makes most sense for your story. So if you're looking at a physiological need, that might be very plot driven, like I'm locked in the trunk of a car and I need to get out. Right. And then how is the character going to respond to this situation? Is it going to be, very cool and MacGyver-like and, pull that wire and pop that trunk? Or is it going to be like a full-blown panic attack? And what is in that history, and work your way back through it?
I'm actually reading a book right now, and I'm trying to find the author's name because, of course, it's tiny on my phone. But it's called The Smell of Other People's Houses by Bonnie Sue Hitchcock. And all of the characters, I'm only in chapter 3, and all of the characters are incredibly wounded from the very, very, very beginning. And so it's really hard to read, and I know it's going to be gut-wrenching at the end, and I'm going to be like, oh my gosh. But anyway, but a lot of my books are not like that. How present does the wound need to be, and how much does that need to, I know it's going to influence but do you always need to find out what the wound is by the end? Is the reader always going to know exactly what happened, or can you make it super subtle? I don't always see the wound for exactly what it is, and then there are books that really do rely on that wound to drive a lot more of the character arc.
I think it depends on, well, first of all, the kind of story you're writing, and then the kind of arc that you want your character to have. Again, if it is more a plot-driven story, where there's a lot of action and excitement and twisty-turny kind of things, then you don't need as much internal growth from the character. So you don't really have to go into that very much. If it's a story about a character, most of the time, what's happening externally is it's not as good at drawing readers in. So in those cases, you want to know what has happened to them. Is, their current situation, is it a result in some ways of what has happened to them in the past? Because there are things happening to our characters all the time that they have no control over. But the decisions they've made, the shielding that they've kind of erected to protect them from that wound happening to them again, the flaws that they now exhibit, the behaviors, the habits that they're doing, the ways that they're relating to other people. I mean, these are all, they think it's protecting them, but it's actually like further train wrecking their lives. It's making things much more difficult. And they've got to be able to recognize that before they can see it for what it is and refute it and adopt a new truth, basically, and move forward. They're going to continue to have problems that are maybe directly related to the wounding event, or they may be ancillary because they're things that are happening now because of this shielding that they have adopted. So it kind of, I hate to be wishy-washy. It really kind of depends on the character and the story. If you really have a story about a character who is growing and changing, then you have to get into that pretty deep. And
so you'd have to reveal on the page the wound as part of your backstory that you're weaving in.
Yeah, and there's different ways, different depths to which you can do that. You have flashbacks where it's like very active, very like the whole scene, you're seeing what happened to the person. But then there's also, I think much more common is those, where their clues are kind of dropped in as the story is going along, and somebody says something and you see a response to a certain object, and all of these different references that you kind of put together over time. And sometimes you don't even have to say it outright, to show what happened, because you've dropped enough clues that the reader is able to put everything together. Sometimes it's just enough to just mention it, like if you look at A Few Good Men, Tom Cruise, with he's in the JAG Corps and he's, the lawyer. You can see that he's living a life that's well below his potential. And he's kind of cocky, not cocky. He's very flippant and like superficial, and he's developed this reputation for plea bargaining all of his cases. He has this fear of stepping into the courtroom, and it's all of these little things that you kind of see, okay, there's something going on with him. And there's a scene in the middle, it's just a conversation that he's having with his friend, where he says to his friend, do you think your dad would be proud of you? And based on clues that have been dropped about his dad being an insanely successful trial attorney in the past, you're able to just from that one conversation, you're able to see, okay, he is just living in the shadow of his father. He wants to be a lawyer. He wants to do it because his dad did it, but also because it's personally fulfilling to him. But he's not living up to his full potential, and it's killing him. And it's all because he's so afraid to step out of that and to basically put himself in the same situation that his dad was in, because these people are going to compare him to him, and they're going to find him lacking, so just, it's a little mention, of what the wound is. It doesn't have to be a big flashback or a whole scene. It can be, shown and displayed a number of different ways depending on, what works best for your story. Wow, I talked like a lot.
No, that was awesome.
That was really great, though. No, yeah. That was great, and
that answered my question very well. Thank you.
So wait, do we have to show the wounds on the page or not?
Well, and you're going to do that more so for the protagonist and antagonist, like secondary characters, even if they have wounds. It's not going to be as large or in your face as as the way that the protagonist would be. So
right, and with the antagonist, we may never even see that, because if the antagonist doesn't have a point of view, or we aren't getting a lot of history or backstory out of that, out of the antagonist's actions, the plot events that happen on the page. So it really depends on your genre and what kind of antagonist you're writing and how involved that person is in your protagonist's life. If it's a much more of like a human interest, character-driven story, we might know the antagonist very, very well, not as well as the protagonist. But if it's an action thriller, the antagonist will probably be off the page a lot, coming on for the fight scenes, the conflicts, the bomb droppings, whatever that kind of thing is.
Yeah, but we talked a lot about motivation in our villain episodes, and this is a really fascinating way to really give your antagonist an awesome motivation, thinking about what are those wounding events, because you'd think that they would have to have some severe wounds to get to where they are. I mean, not always, but like some antagonists, you could really explore that as being a huge, part of their psyche.
Right. And in the companion episode we just did with Becca, we talked about backstory and villains quite a bit. So if anyone hasn't heard that yet, definitely go back and listen to it. And a really great example of what you're talking about, Kathryn, is The Incredibles. Have you guys seen that movie?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in the opening, before the time jump, it's almost a prologue when the heroes are loved by everyone and they get to be superheroes and pursue their passion. Buddy shows up to help Mr. Incredible, and Mr. Incredible sends him on his way because he's just a kid getting underfoot who's going to get hurt. And then later, Buddy comes back as our villain. He's a superhero without powers, so he's used technology to turn himself into a supervillain and wipe out the superheroes, with a vengeance for Mr. Incredible specifically. So there we've been set up to understand his wound in that prologue, seeing the before picture of the child. And you talk in the book, Becca, about how so many of our wounds happen when we're children. And even though in the grand scheme of life they might seem like nothing, like someone saying, "Get out of here, kid, you're going to get hurt," that can be the crux of some deep cavern in our psyche that leads to all sorts of trauma later. And that's what I think is really versatile about the wounds, is that there are so many factors that go into determining how a person is going to respond. People go through the same horrific event and one person comes out, virtually unscathed, and someone else is completely debilitated by it. There's so many factors. It comes down to, your support system, who was the responsible person, how close you were to them, how close you were to the actual event, other things that had been going on in your life. If you had already experienced something you were going through something difficult, or if you were in a really good place. I mean, there's so many different factors that can go into determining how it's going to impact the character. And so you have so many options in terms of, I think a lot of people kind of stress out about figuring out exactly, what it was, but there really you have a lot of choices, you have a lot of options, and you can fine tune, custom design basically this event based on these other factors to make it either more impactful, or for your secondary cast to make it a little less, traumatic, so that they have a different level of relation to it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I like what you were just saying. It made me think of Buddy again, and if he weren't the antagonist, he might have just had his feelings hurt and then lacked self-worth, So you can look at all of these emotional wounds and all the possibilities for the way these events turn out, and how they shape your character on this huge spectrum, from the very sort of subtle and mundane, like, now I doubt myself and think I'm incompetent, to now I'm going to overcompensate and create super technology and become a villain. So your
It's
possibilities really are completely endless. Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about shielding? You mentioned that while you were talking, and I think that's a really great aspect of our character development to cover.
Yeah, it's shielding is basically, Michael Haig calls it emotional armor, which I think is just as good for describing what it is. But it's basically when something bad happens, we're so afraid that it's going to happen again. That becomes our number one motivation, is to keep this from happening again. And so we adopt new protections to keep that from happening again. So sometimes this is in the form of flaws, where we adopt these negative behaviors that we think are negative traits that we think are actually going to help us. They're going to protect us. Somebody who a victim of domestic abuse, she may emerge from that and feel like she can keep it from happening again by controlling every aspect of her life. She's never going to let anybody else control her again. And this seeps over into controlling other people's lives, the people that are important to her. And it ends up being a dysfunctional thing, because that's what flaws are. They are inherently dysfunctional. They damage our relationships, and they keep us from growing and from moving forward. So the character takes on these new flaws a lot of times without really thinking about it consciously. And they think it's good. They think that it's something to cling to because it's keeping them safe.
Right. When
in reality, it's complicating other areas of their lives, and it's making it impossible for them to actually move on and move forward. Flaws then, of course, give way to new behaviors, because when you adopt these negative traits, then your behaviors adapt to it. So she may become somebody who is super hypercritical of herself and of other people. She may be someone who requires constant, check-ins and immediate obedience and these things from the people in her life that are going to drive people away. It's going to create this new need that she had. She was okay with love and belonging, but now she's missing it because she has driven away the people in her life. So flaws and then behaviors follow that. And there's also the what comes naturally out of a wounding event is some kind of a lie or a false belief that the character comes to believe most of the time about themselves, because when something happens, we want to know why it happened. Why did this happen? Why did it happen to me? How can I keep it from happening again? And a lot of times we want to know who to blame. We want to know who's at fault, because we have all these negative emotions and they need to go somewhere. So we want to know who is at fault. And so often we end up blaming ourselves. I don't know what it is in human nature that we do this. I mean, you look at kids whose parents are divorced. They always think that it's their fault when they had nothing to do with it. And that happens so many times. So you something bad happens, you think you're to blame, and so you end up believing something about yourself that is not true. And it's usually something to do with your self-worth or your value. The controlling person, I was weak. He targeted me because I'm a weak person.
Right.
Or the only way to protect myself is to never let anyone be in control of me again. These are things that are not actually true, but they believe them. They believe that that's how they're going to be kept safe. So they believe these things about themselves or about the world. It could be turned outward to an organization or the government or God or, whatever it is that we start to believe things. We generalize and we form biases about groups of people or organizations, institutions. And all of that affects the way that we view ourselves and the way that we treat other people.
Right.
So again, it's debilitating. It creates this scenario where the time when we need the most support, we are adopting these things that we think are protecting us, but they're actually pushing people away. They're creating distance between us and the people around us. So the shielding, it's just things that responses to a wounding event that we think are good for us, but they actually kind of mire us. They get us stuck where we can't move forward. We can't, it's ironic. We're trying to keep the fear, keep the wounding event at bay. We're trying to keep it from happening again, but those shielding techniques, they actually keep it really close to us because we're constantly focused on it. We're so scared it's going to happen again. How do I keep it from happening again? So we're constantly turned backwards instead of looking forward and able to move on and grow and overcome. Sadly, again, based in psychology, that's just kind of the ways that things happen.
Right. And then as writers, if we understand our character's wounding event, we can figure out what those responses are and how the character does the emotional shielding and how this leads to flaws, which lead to behaviors and create obstacles on the way to accomplishing the goal. So this all factors into that character arc, and we need to get the character to have some moments of realization, to drop some shields, to get past some of these barriers in order to successfully progress through the change arc, through that that positive arc we talked about at the beginning.
It's kind of cool because it all fits together. I mean, it literally, it's a bunch of pieces that just kind of click, 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 click. And if you're missing one, you can figure out, either moving ahead or moving backward, what's missing and what could have happened or what would have resulted from that. I don't know, writing it was a really satisfying kind of, when you realize, oh my gosh, it totally works. It all fits together.
Oh, so cool. So fun. So as we wrap this up, Kathryn, do you have any final questions or thoughts to share with Becca? Or
no, I'm just really excited for this resource.
Yeah. Me too. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners, Becca?
I don't think that I do. We're just so excited to be able to share everything that we learned. We learned a ton in writing it. Just to be able to put it out there and kind of make it available to people. It's super exciting.
Yeah, it is. And I hope our listeners will go to storyworkspodcast.com. We are going to have show notes for both of these episodes, and Kathryn puts in the timestamp. So if you want to find some specific nugget in these episodes, it'll be really easy to do. And we'll have links so you can find Becca and the emotional wound thesaurus.
There's also, I'm sorry, see, I said I didn't have anything and now I do. On our blog, we have downloadable versions of the appendix items that are in the book, which is, there's a character arc progression tool that we have that kind of takes you through. It's where you can fill in the blanks for everything. And there's another one that slips my mind right now, but we have those on the tools page of our blog where you can download them and have blank copies to work with.
Oh, fantastic. And we will definitely link to those. Thank you so much for listening to This Works Storyworks Roundtable. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.